Welcome to the BB Toolbox and part 2 in my reboot series on working with Microsoft SQL Server Databases in Visual Basic.NET. In the next few videos, we'll be developing a very basic user management system to demonstrate how to insert records into the database, delete them, and also update them. So let's go ahead and get started. If you did not watch part 1, I highly recommend watching that. In that tutorial, we covered building our SQL control class. So if you're following along without doing that, you might be a little bit lost. I mean, we'll be covering basic syntax and whatnot, but I still recommend checking that out. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to add a new entry to my menu strip up here, and you can do this however you want and on your side. I'm just going to keep it really simple. I'm going to create a Manage Users section and then add a few items here. Probably just going to keep it really basic here. I'll do a new user and delete user, whoops, and of course edit user. All right, I'm going to rename this guy. Select it, come over here because you can see these names are extremely long, so I'm just going to call this MSI new user. All right, might as well rename these ones while we're at it. MSI delete user. MSI edit user. I just like having a little more user friendly. Those names are ridiculously long by default, so that's totally up to you. Okay, so to do this, we're going to do it similarly to what we did with our inventory screen, and we'll create a window for each one of these entries. So I'm going to start, because we're working on inserting records into the database, I'm going to be working with this guy here. So what I'm going to do is come over to my Solution Explorer and add another form. And I'm going to call this form new user. Add that to my project. And I'm going to keep this extremely basic and simple here. And I will be using the same database that I did in part 1. You're welcome to use your own database. If you want to work with your own data, that's fine. So I have a ridiculously simple table here. I'm just going to say select star from members. All right. Now we'll run that. And you can see that I have a few items in this database here. One thing to note, and I always say this, and you know, some people are a little frustrated that I haven't gone a little deeper into this subject, but it's highly recommended that you do not store your passwords in your table in plain text like this. The proper way to do this would be to store a password hash, that is an encrypted hash of your password, and to test the database against that rather than actually you know, leaving something in your database that could be compromised by nefarious forces. And you know, so having a hashed password is definitely recommended. I'm sorry I have not got a tutorial on doing that yet. There's so many things to consider when working with encryption, and I may yet cover the topic because I do have some, you know, basic code for doing that I've made. So, but anyway, just a little heads up. In this case, I'm trying to be fast, I'm trying to be simple, and so I'm using plain text passwords. So let's jump back to our new user form and add a few fields here. I'm going to go to my toolbox and I'm going to add a command button down here to submit my entry. And I'm also going to add a couple of text boxes. Let's see, where are you here? A text box for the username. As you can see, I don't have a huge number of fields here. I'm just going to copy that and duplicate it. And let's see, I'm going to add a couple of checkboxes as well. So I'm going to grab that, copy, Control V or Control C, Control V, copy and paste it. One will be for the admin column, and one will be for the active column. These are pretty much Boolean columns, holds a 0 and a 1. So similar to the checkbox, we should be able to just run those values right into the checkbox. Let's go ahead and grab a couple of labels as well. I'm going to do username and one for password. All right. Now I'm going to change the properties on these. Starting with this guy here, and I'm going to just name this txt user, and I'm going to change the border style. You don't have to do this, just like setting it and flattening it out a bit. I'm gonna grab the second one, call it txt pass or password, whichever you prefer. And I'm going to change the text on these labels. I'm not going to change the name, just the caption. I call that one username. And I'm going to call this one password. All right, you can grab both of these by shift clicking them, dragging them over a little bit. Not going to work on beautifying this too much. Sorry. Forgot to change that one. All right. Not get too fancy on this. I'm going to change this to CB for checkbox and active under the name property. And I'm going to set the text caption on that to active. And similarly with this one, I'm going to change the text to admin and change the name to CB admin. All right. Kind of pull that up just slightly. Not get too fancy. And now we are ready to start coding on this very basic form here. Now in part one, we made the parent form an MDI parent, so these other little forms would open up inside of it. So first thing we need to do is double click on this form to generate a load event, and make sure that we set the MDI parent of this form to our main form, which is form 1. Okay, that just associates with it, so it opens up within the other form. Next up, we need to create a connection to our database, similarly to what we did before with our inventory screen, where we created an instance of our SQL Server. Oops, I did not mean to run my program there. So I can close out of that. Pushing the wrong buttons here. So first thing we do here is add a private instance of SQL as a new SQL control. All right. I'm not going to use the parameters with that. Just use the default connection that we established in part 1. Now that we have that, we can begin creating a method to insert records into our database. So what I'm going to do is go to create a new sub called private sub insert user. And because we're just using this basic form, I'm not even going to bother adding parameters to this. Just keep it simple. So we're going to add our SQL parameters and run the command. It's very simple. So for our parameters, we're going to be capturing the values that are provided in each one of these fields, okay? So what I'm going to do, where'd it go, is call upon my SQL control and use the add param method that we created. And I'm going to add a parameter for each field. So I'm going to say first one is going to be for my username. I'm just going to call it @user. And the value that I want to provide here is going to be txtuser.text. Okay. And I kind of outlined what the SQL parameters do and how they help prevent SQL injection attacks. Because we're allowing users to type into these fields, if we were not using parameters and directly running the command in that text box against the database, a nefarious user could insert malicious code in here that would be executed. They could break the command string and perform other actions, maybe drop a table or return values that they shouldn't have access to, anything that they want. So I outlined that in part 1. I'm going to add another parameter here, and this one I'm going to call @pass. You kind of see the pattern here. And then I will bring in my password box, and I want the text value from that password box. And I'm going to add 2 more here. I'm going to do an add param, and I'm going to do @active. And for this one, I'm going to use the value, the checked value for the checkbox, because we're going to send a Boolean value to the database. So I will do cbActive.checked. All right. That'll send a 0 or a 1 to the database. And here, of course, well, sorry, do admin. I think my microphone is in my way. cbadmin.checked. All right, and that is all the parameters that we need to insert our user into the database. Now we just need to create our command string to update the database or insert our record. So I'm going to say SQL.execute query. And here I'm going to say insert into, whoa, I can't type today. What is wrong? Members. Add some parentheses here to specify the columns that I want to insert values into. I'm going to start with the username, and then I will do the password column, and then active, and then admin. And if you wanted, you could also do something like, what did we have? What else did we have? We had a join date, right? So got last active and join date. We could do this. As soon as the member is created, we'll insert the join date as well. And put a space at the end here before you terminate the string so the next line will not be run on. And I'm going to do a line break here and continue my string. So I want to insert the values in my parameters, okay? And the parameter values I want to add are @user, @pass, @active, and of course @admin. All right. Now we also did the join date. What I want to do is capture the current date. So to do that, I'm going to use a SQL database value here. I'm going to say get date, open parentheses and close parentheses, just like that. All right. And once I do that, I'm ready to test for errors to see if there was any problems running this. So I'm going to say report and abort on errors. So I'll say if SQL.hasException, and I do want to report if I if it fails for whatever reason. I'd like to know why it does it, so I'm going to go ahead and report any errors that may exist. Then if there is an error, report it and exit the subroutine. All right. Okay. So if everything goes well and there's no errors and it did not exit prematurely, I can do something like, say, a message box to say that the user was created successfully. Awesome. Oh, that's pretty simple. So now we have a method to insert a user into our database. A couple changes here. I'm going to go ahead and bounce back over to my form. I don't think we didn't rename our button, so I'm going to call the name CMD submit and change the value to save or submit, whatever you prefer. All right. So now that we have that, you can just double click on your button, and when we're ready, we can just click the button and run our insert user. Super simple. What if the user entered some bad data? Maybe if you want, this is whenever you're inserting data into your database, it's probably a good idea to have some form of field validation. This is really up to you. I'm just going to add some very basic form validation here. First thing I'm going to do is take this save button and I'm going to disable it. I'm going to go, where's the enabled value right there? Go to false. And now that'll be grayed out when it launches. And then I'm going to double click on any one of my text boxes here to create a text change event. And I'm going to make this text change event work for both of my text fields. So you can change this if you want. I could just call it text field, so it's a little vague there. And I can put a comma here and add another text box. Right now it's txt user. I want to monitor both the user and the password field. So I want to capture the text change event for both of these. So if the text is changed in either box, then perform some very basic validation. All right. I'm just going to say if not, string dot is null or empty, or null or white space, txt user dot text, and also meaning that both of these conditions absolutely must be correct, and if either one isn't, then don't even bother checking the next one. Not string dot is null or white space, txt pass dot text, then cmd submit dot enabled equals true. So what it's going to do, every time text changes in either one of these fields, it's going to run this little checker to make sure that neither one of the fields is empty or blank. Okay, so as soon as both of these conditions are met, then it's automatically going to change the enabled value on our command button to true. Now, we're not quite ready to view our form yet because we first have to jump back to our main form and tie this in and have it bring it up. So I'm going to say new user dot show. That was easy. Now I should be able to run this. And if all is well, I should be able to click this and boom, there's my window. Awesome. So text in there, text in there. Our button is still gray. Once both conditions are met, the text is ready to be saved to the database. So probably don't want to test it quite like that. I'm going to say VB toolbox, and for password, passwords in plain text there. We can at least obfuscate that a little bit. So I'm going to come down here, go to password, select that, and say use password character true. Run that again. Manage users, new VB toolbox. Testing. That's better. And I'm going to go ahead and make myself an admin. You'd probably have some sort of token in the real world rather than actually just setting a Boolean value that could be hacked on the client side. Just things to consider in the real world, but those are tough subjects to go over. So I hit save, and the user was created successfully. Yay! Now we should probably clear these form fields after we save, so the user just doesn't automatically, or you could just close the form. That would work too, unless you wanted to add multiple users. So however you want to manage that, you could do something simple here, like txt user dot clear txt pass dot clear cb active dot checked equals false cb admin dot checked hello equals false. All right. Oh, yeah, let's disable the actually, I wonder if that would automatically trigger that event by clearing these. I'm just kind of curious, rather than disabling the button again. It's always fun learning on the fly. Sample 2, testing 1, admin, save. User created successfully. And it's clear. It did not disable the button again. So after this, you could say cmd submit dot enabled equals false. You probably just have a little subroutine, so it's up to you. All right, well, that was pretty easy. Let's go ahead and just break our query and make sure that our error checking is working well. Manage users, new user, Jim, Bob, save. Uh-oh, got an exception, incorrect syntax near bracket. So, yep, worked good. Didn't blow up our app. We can still close out gracefully. Everything looks good there. So now that's pretty much all there is to it. That is how you insert records into your database. Now, a question that I'd like to answer at the end of this video here actually in the past, many people have asked me, how do you get a hold, what is the proper way to get a hold of the last inserted record? In most database applications, you're working with multiple tables, and you create a master record first and then save it to the database, and then you go to update the child record and you need access to the last record that you inserted. And you run into some problems when you use, you could grab the max identity. You could say select max identity column and grab the last record that was inserted. But the problem with that is that if you're working in a multi-user environment where numerous people could be updating records at the same time, you may run into an issue where you create a record at the same time as someone else, and you create your record, someone else comes along and creates another parent record over top of yours, and you don't know it in the background. So you go to use max, and rather than grabbing your own record, it grabs their record. And so you start adding items to that, and you can see where there might be problems with that. Say you're entering a sales order or purchase order or something like that. So what I'm going to do is show you a couple of different methods here to update our SQL control so that it can optionally return a value after you insert. You can retrieve the last identity field that was added under your user session in the database. So let's go ahead and get started on that. I'm going to go ahead and jump back into my SQL control class that we created in part 1. And there are a few options available to us when we're working with SQL Server to return the last record that was inserted under our session, or just in general. There's, you've got the way that a lot of people try to do this, the problematic way where you do a select max identity record. And then there are a couple others that, have some slightly different execution methods or values that they return. So what I'm going to do is come down here below the record count area, and to do a query return, actually first thing I want to do is add a parameter to our execute query. Okay, and I'm going to make it an optional parameter so we can omit it if we want to. So I'm going to say optional, and I'm just going to say return identity. Wow. Apologize for my lousy typing tonight. Return identity as a Boolean value. And because it's optional, we have to provide a default value, and I want that to be false. If we omit it on the query execution side in either our inventory form or our new user form, it will just automatically go to false, and we don't have to worry about it. But optionally, if we want it, we want to return the last identity that was inserted into the database. Okay, so we're going to say if return identity equals true, then do some stuff. And the first thing it will do is we'll create a query to return that identity. So I'm going to do something like dim return query as a string, and the query that I want to run is select at identity. All right, and I'm just gonna give it a column name of last ID and end that with a semicolon. And so we have a very simple query here that we can return optionally. All right, so in the event that we do not use this, it's going to run through our standard query commands or whatever. Go down through here, load the data table with our SQL adapter, and return a record count after filling the data table. If we do select true, we essentially are going to run another query within the same session as this previous command. Once we close the session, once it hits this right here, our session ends, and we no longer have access to this @@ identity. It has to be run on the same session that the previous command was run. Okay, in order to pick up the insert, it has to be run in the same session. Now, it doesn't have to be run in the same scope, and I'll kind of get through these, kind of give you the different options here that we have to work with. But what we do need to do, because our previous command was consumed when it was run, when it was executed here, okay? It got consumed and destroyed, so we need to create a new DB command afterward in the same session. So I'm going to say DB CMD equals a new SQL command. And the command that I want to run is this query. So I'm going to say return query. And the connection that I want to run it on is dbcon, that is still open from our previous one. All right. Once we do that, it's just like running our previous query here. We're going to do the exact same things. We're going to say db dt. We want to overwrite whatever was created down here, the data table and the data adapter. So I say new data table, and that creates a new empty data table. And then I'm going to create a new data adapter. And I want to execute my db command in that data adapter. So I'm going to say db cmd. And then once I have executed it, I want to fill the data table up with this value that has been returned. So I'm going to say record count equals db da.fill, and I'm going to fill the db data table. Okay, so we created a new data table, created a new adapter, executed the command, and then filled the data table with the output. All right. So what this should do, and I'm going to go over how, what our different options are and how they, are different. But what we've done here is we've executed an insert statement, right? And then we checked for return identity. We did want to see what the last value inserted was, so we selected the identity, the last identity that was inserted under the current session, not the same scope, but the same session, and then we outputted it as a second query. So we pretty much just destroyed these three items here and rebuilt them. Clear as mud. All right, so let's jump back over to our new user form real quick, and what we can do, under our execute query, we added the new optional parameter. So what I'm going to do is, do I want to return a return identity? Yes, I do. All right. So I'm going to insert my values, my new user, and then I'm going to return this value. Now we can choose to completely ignore it, or we can actually do something with it. So how can we test this? You could either capture that return value to a variable if you want to carry it over to another form, or do whatever you want to do with it. Or we can come down here below our error checking and say if SQL.dataTable.rows.count is greater than 0, meaning that something happened and we have a record waiting for us in our data table. Then we'll create a data row. We'll do R as data row equals SQL.datatable.rows, and we're going to grab the very first item that it finds, which was, there should only be one column and one value returned ever, but that'll be our last ID. So grab the very first. This just makes sure that there's something there before we try grabbing it, otherwise it'll crash on us. Just a little error checking. We'll say message box R for our data row, and the field that we want to pull out. So I just want to grab column last ID, okay? And I'm just going to make sure that's a string value coming out of there to my message box. So if all works well, when I insert a value, a new user, I'm going to say hello, testing, I think I mistyped that, don't care, admin and active, save it, awesome. So let's check that 21 is what it's saying is the last inserted key value. It's returning our identity column, our primary key. So let me run this query again. Check it out. Hello, testing. Okay. Anyway, you saw me enter it. This was the value that it returned. So it will always grab the last inserted ID, but if there are 3 users entering new users at the same time, it's only going to return the last ID that you in your session entered, because it's occurring within your session, okay? So what are some of the other options? An even better option, which we can't use in this instance because it functions slightly different, and I would be using this if I could. You could redesign your query to use it, but you could do select. Let's see, it is scope identity. All right. Scope identity returns the last ID inserted under the same scope and the same session, okay? Now the reason I can't use this is because while we're still in the same session, we are not in the same scope, and the scope is whatever query you are presently launching. And by query, I also mean it could be a trigger, it could be a stored procedure. Whatever was last fired is the scope of your command, okay? So that could be a trigger event, or it could be, you know, something that's occurring in a stored procedure. But if I did this now, I would get a null value because I have left, as soon as this executed, I'm no longer in the same scope. I have begun another scope by creating another query. So I hope that makes sense. So if you worked this in through, you know, instead of doing these commands through your forms, instead using a SQL database stored procedure or something, you could work in that that user scope, which is really the best way, the safest way to do it. But in our case, we pretty much have to stick with, I'm going to go ahead and cut that. I'm going to use the @identity. The @identity, which only cares about the current session. That's your session that you're working within in the database. And by session, I mean anything between here, open, and close. So if you had, one place where this could go wrong is if you have, something, you insert a new user and that launches a trigger on that database that updates another table. It's going to grab the last table that was updated. Okay, it's the last place that a record was inserted. So you can run into issues like that. So I'm going to say at identity, and there's some really good sites out there. If you just Google them, you can find much better, much more concise explanations of these variables. So, oh, hey, I captured that, didn't I? And the last one is ident current. Using ident current and the table name, you can grab the last value that was inserted into any table in your database, regardless of whose session it was created in. Say if I wanted to just see what the last identity value is in my members table, I could use that ident current to grab it, regardless of whether it was created by my account or some other user that's logged into the system that just inserted another record. If he inserted one after me, it's going to grab his just like the max ID would. Okay, so that just allows you to hit up a certain table, find out what the last record inserted into that table was. Okay, so you can say last identity in table, any scope, any session. So I hope that answers some of those questions. I'm sorry it was such a rambling ordeal. But I've covered pretty much everything I wanted to in this particular tutorial. So let's go ahead and move on to part 3, I guess. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope to catch you on the next video. So if you like it, give me the old thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give me the thumbs down, I guess. Tell me what I did wrong. I know these are a bit long and I apologize, but I appreciate everybody's support and help on these. So, if you see questions asked by other users, I appreciate the community support, other people helping out and answering some of those. It's a lot of work keeping up with everybody's questions and comments. So I do appreciate every one of them, though. So y'all take care. I will talk to you later. Bye.